Get 5 coffins ready.
Okay, we've been sappy, been nice, now it's time to get tilted and talk about some of the issues Smite has had throughout its lifetime. I mean, I'm writing this right after streaming, so I'm angry. Okay, so what's in this video? This video will largely focus on the big stroke problems of Smite. Long-standing decisions held up or otherwise not addressed by high-res for very long periods of time, or just straight up our design philosophies that I personally very much disagree with. So in short, let's get out of the way. One-time mistakes such as rituals will not be discussed in this video. They were a terrible idea, and I think most of you didn't have to live through it, so good. Most of what I discuss today will be things that have prevailed throughout a majority of Smite's lifespan, or legitimately have, in my view, been problematic for basically the entire game's lifecycle. And again, my fair weather friends, the specific, direct, diametric, aspiratic change to Smite that I think changed the game for the worst, with one single patch change, will be in the next video I make. This video just covers broad stroke decisions and/or decisions that were repeated in Smite's design throughout its lifecycle. Starting off with the obvious one, using the marriage of Unreal Engine 3 as a game engine and Adobe Flash, is that what it's called, for their user interface. God, it's been so long since I heard it. I mean, in terms of future-proofing, this was a pairing on the levels of Yoko Ono and John Lennon. I mean, really, what was the plan there? Y'all were just throwing in a towel, or... Now, admittedly, while Smite was being conceived, Unreal Engine 4, Unreal 3's dad, as it were, was not a thing. It simply did not exist to the public until 2014. And Smite, being released in 2012, would not exist in the same time. Okay, so clearly, it's hard to blame high-res on the whole, but gosh darn flib did Unreal Engine just suck. It just sucked. Day-to-day bugs is one thing, but namely mechanical restrictions come to mind too. You know, things like the plates on the teleporters for Season 11, the totem masks of Season 10, and further back things like the obelisks from Seasons 8 and 9, or the gold chalice in Season... I don't remember, that mechanic was ass. The reason they were all, like, standing on things and hitting things and, like, whatever, is because Unreal Engine 3 was just terrible for that kind of thing. I mean, at the time it was fine, and by the time I mean around 2009. 2009! Yeah, standing on plates and then stuff happening in games was neat in 2009, but for anything past the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 era, it's not what players expect or demand. And it's been made very clear by our blessed Smite 2 devs that a lot of the janky and weird interactions from Smite 1 were only weird because it was created in an engine that was made for previous generations of hardware in mind. Again, it's kind of hard to call it Hi-Rez's fault, since they were a whole 2 years out from the public release of Unreal Engine 4, when Smite first came out in open beta, but it really did shoot them in the foot for the next 11 years or so. And Adobe Flash, yeah man, I'm not a game programmer. In fact, I kind of suck at programming my own life out, so I'm not one to talk about how they should have developed Smite. But like, seriously, like half the issues with Smite are user interface related, which means Adobe Flash related. And considering they never overhauled the user interface, it's safe to say that Smite was developed with Adobe Flash, which as we all know would be around forever, was meant to be integral to the design of Smite to the point that they had to start from scratch to get rid of it, hence Smite 2. Of course, the main reason for Smite 2 is a good old Unreal Engine 3 to Unreal Engine 5 conversion, or sort of redoing, not really conversion, but getting rid of the long-term defunct and just frankly awful Adobe Flash interface is a very happy coincidence with the move over. I mean, just this patch we're getting a bug where you can't type in lobby chat after game without clicking back into the text box, and also having item images disappear mid-match. It's just terrible. It's a real shame that Hi-Rez was stuck with Unreal Engine 3, the best and most adaptable engine the company had at their financial level at the time. And Adobe Flash, yeah, it wasn't really forward-looking for them to use it, but again, it's right there and ready to use. And it wasn't their fault that Adobe Flash would become defunct and stop having any updates leading up to its eventual demise just a few years later. In the same vein as a game engine, I'll give a quick nod to the servers of Smite, which have been notoriously awful. It's definitely not as bad as it used to be for certain. For me, seasons 3 through 7-ish could be described as straight up bad. Constant outages, strange random ping spikes for like no reason, but it does seem like splitting the NA regions into NA and NA West helped me at least in terms of connection consistency and just generally the entire system not, going offline. It's been a lot better the past few years, but whatever exactly has been causing all the outages and spikes of bad performance over the years, I really do want addressed publicly by Hi-Rez, just to know if there's anything they can really do with these servers with Smite 2, and maybe not necessarily guarantee, but have some assurances that these issues will at least be looked at if not straight up fixed. But I have to assume it's going to be nowhere near as bad as Smite 1 was. Yeah, that sounded kind of vague, but it's not really a topic Hi-Rez has addressed other than the times they say we're working on it. So let's get to decisions that Hi-Rez actively made while Smite was in its heyday. Keeping things directly out of game for a moment, let's quickly touch on Hi-Rez going to Mixer. Yeah, another one that's pretty obvious. What do we have here? This may surprise you, but I'm not a part of Hi-Rez's accounting department, so I can't say moving the Smite Pro League exclusively over to Mixer for the live broadcasting of seasons 5 through 7 with replays available on YouTube was goofy. But regardless, Mixer was just not it. A bit like Kick, but just like minus the crime, Mixer was Microsoft's answer to Twitch. I.e., it's just like Twitch, just without the infrastructure, community, and history. So it's pretty bad. Now, Twitch is okay. It is the gaming streaming platform and the butt streaming platform, yet it still has a lot to improve on even today, let alone in 2018. But an even more strictly policed service, with no positives to speak of, and with less, well, frankly notable streamers and thereby their communities and emotes, means their service is pointless. And Harris took a deal to stream with them exclusively for 2 years, or something. I don't know what the exact deal was. I googled it, I couldn't really find specifics, but it was all seasons 5 and 6 all on Mixer. At least as for the official broadcast of the Smite Pro League. As far as I can remember, it seemed like rebroadcasts and co-streams and other services weren't met without an Iron Hammer or anything, like the Call of Duty League is. And I mean, even after their time exclusively on Mixer, they still streamed there, but it was obvious that Mixer brought nothing to the table and Hi-Rez seriously damaged their viewership by going over to Mixer. And that's the entire story. 2 of some of the most important years of the SPL that would shape the final years of the SPL, all streamed on a platform nobody cared about, for an exclusivity deal we're not entirely sure Hi-Rez even really needed. There are conflicting stories on this. Some say the long game was to take the Mixer money and push towards having seasons 7 through 10 of the SPL. Which, I might add, also saw Hi-Rez giving players salaries and cutting out gaming organizations despite a dwindling player base. I mean, how are they supposed to make that happen without the Mixer money? I'm of the opinion that they probably stored it aside, rather than directly injecting it into the SPL. Or maybe Smite was struggling financially way earlier than we all thought, as in Season 5 or so, and they needed the money from Mixer, which again was from Microsoft, to survive. At the end of the day, we likely got the Smite Pro League, not necessarily Smite, for as long as we did thanks to the deal, so kudos there. Watching Nika backdoor the Oni Warriors will never not be funny, but you kinda did inconvenience everyone with this change and make the SPL a chore to watch compared to, I don't know, every other gaming pro league. Alright, we've had our fun speculating. Now let's get to specific changes or whole design decisions in-game that I personally find to have damaged Smite in the long run. And first off, it's gotta be the bloated items, stemming all the way back to the closed beta. Yeah, this is when some of y'all were a twinkle in your dad's eye. So you guys know how Jotun's Wrath has 20% CDR, power, pen, and is cheap, making it a one-stop shop, and has made it prevalent in literally every season of Smite? Well, it used to be even stronger, with the 1 more penetration, but more importantly 25% CDR. That's right, basically every long-standing item you'd see in the game that had CDR would have 25% CDR, and then the 10% CDR items we come to know and love would have 15%. So the old ratio was getting 2 items with CDR on them, one with 25 and the other with 15%. So 2 items for full CDR was the name of the game basically when Smite dropped. And this to me was a common issue very early on in Smite, and hurt the game's item shop immensely. Same things with things like Obsidian Shard and Titan's Bane. These are almost one-stop shop items where you get almost the entirety of a stat you need from one item. And it's not really the fact that these items exist in the game now, it's more like they hurt any future items that had more unique special effects. Sure, Stone-Cutting Sword is cool, but why not just get Jotun's Wrath for your flat pen? Yeah, Bloodforge is fun, but why would I ever choose it over stacking Dev's Gloves? And so on and so on. It basically meant that any new item with a unique effect also had to be what became known as stat sticks. Here I'm of course talking about, I don't know, every ADC item ever. Reworked Golden Bow, Soul Eater, the original one, the percent pen version of Atalanta's Bow, Shadow Steel Shuriken, and so on. Items that have kinda cool effects, but just need to have absurd stat lines or cut costs simply because who cares about unique effects when I could just have good old biscuits and eggs. Devourer's Gauntlet over here with the stats I could ever ask for. That's the best I had. Biscuits and cheese. Or eggs? Why did I say cheese? So basically every time they buffed the new items till they had the same stats or better stats than the items we've been buying for years at that point. Over and over and over again. Now, that's not unheard of. Releasing something new into the game, it being underpowered or just underexplored, then the devs buff it a bunch so that people use their shiny new item. But this seriously happened with like every new item. Either new items were dead on arrival, or buffed until they had matching or greater stats than the stat stack items. It was the only way to make people buy the items. And of course, switch up the builds a bit. This usually begins by reducing the price, typically within 100 gold of the stat stick item in the role that everyone buys it in. Then adding some CDR to it, some pen, or god forbid power. Then everyone buys it. Everyone gets sick of the item because everyone is buying it first every single time. Then they either rework or remove it the next season. Like, every single time. And this I think goes all the way back to the start of Smite with those fat stat items like Breastplate of Valor, Chronos Pendant, Jotun's Wrath, and Dev Gloves, showing a clear design focus toward having the meta items be defined by stats rather than unique item effects or interactions. And speaking of items, one serious flaw in Smite's design has got to be the item trees, which I lovingly describe as lumpy. Now, I'm trying not to too much on League of Legends in this video. The Smite 2 devs are definitely already doing that for me, but holy hell is that system just so much nicer to use in the Smite system. Exactly what I mean by this is how the Smite trees are set up. A tier 1 item, which is always awful for the price, a tier 2 item, which is even worse for the price, and finally a tier 3 item, which could be considered an actual item. Now you see, this is stupid for a very obvious reason. The tier 1s are way too expensive and the tier 2s do absolutely nothing, and again, are too expensive. Not here or there or just on a specific item tree, no, it's like all planned out to be this way. So since every item in the game comes with 3 tiers, it's 100% fair to say that 2/3 of the entire items in the game are just awful. The only time tier 1 items are useful is at the very start of the match. That is it. The way League of Legends has it is that you spend your entire starting gold in your starting item and maybe a health potion or two. With Smite, on the other hand, with the way starting items work, you go start item and tier 1 of your first item. This is fine at the start of the match, since all they have to do is make the tier 1 items and start items generally the same price, and bam, you have a system where everyone gets starter item, tier 1 item, and potions. Cool. So in a sense, this makes starts more flexible than the League of Legends system. But that's where the good times end, because man, these items are lumpy in Smite, and ties directly back to the whole bloated stack item situations that I just mentioned. This all of course relating to item cost. The 3 tiers tend to be relatively evenly split. Tiers 1 and 2 cost similar, going from one to another, then tier 3 costs a smidge more. Yeah, but you see the problem is that tier 2s are terrible. So since there's such a big difference cost-wise between the tiers 2 and 3, usually on your first back, unless you got a kill or something, you'll be going for a tier 2, which is terrible. Which not only clearly promotes and amplifies snowballing no matter how you slice it, it just generally makes your first back feel absolutely awful no matter what. Unless, of course, you're getting the cheapest item possible. I.e. your Jotuns, your devs, the same item you've been building for 10 years. Especially in Transcendence or Book of Thoth metas, what does this do? What is this doing for me? So League trumps this in 2 simple ways. For one, most tier 2 items have some sort of passive, and those that don't have a passive tend to cost a lot less. And these passives aren't chump change. Imagine things like a less damaging Mystical Mail, a Golden Shard that actually does something, or Hydra's Lament just with no power. And plus, tier 2 items usually require at least 2 tier 1 items to build into it. So what this means is that you can actually get ganked early on, and not get enough gold for your 2 item and be all poked out and at the back, but you can easily buy a tier 1 that either works with your first item or works for your next item, and it's totally fine since the tier 1s are so cheap, and more or less just as powerful as the ones in Smite. The system just works better for creating a smoother feeling game even when you're getting ass blasted. In Smite, when you're getting focused out, you can literally just die once or twice and maybe get a tier 2 item if you're lucky, and God forbid you try to get a tier 1 item to enhance your power just a little bit, like a tier 1 defense item. Doing this is a terrible idea in Smite simply because of how expensive tier 1's items are. So in turn, you actually delay your item build by a great deal. So this, as I said earlier, makes the item building in Smite feel lumpy in comparison. This wasn't such a problem when boots were in the game, but that's for another time. Next up, let me be a hippopotocrate real quick. Last video I mentioned that I liked how well defined characters are in Smite. Although, this has led to some issues, largely down to the metagame of Smite, as in what's exactly strongest in Smite. With so many characters who achieve similar things in Smite, the most obvious example being basic attack based warriors like Bellona, Amaterasu, Osiris, and Erlang Shen, it can make it so that many characters simply don't have a niche, and instead rely on being overbuffed as a character. Since hey, it doesn't matter, since they all achieve the same thing, all these basic attack based warriors can all abuse whatever strong item is there, so it just depends on what character is strongest. This is extremely difficult to not do when balancing a game, we've seen it a million billion times. But in Smite you can feel this across the board. Gotta thank Hi-Rez for buffing Soul Eater and releasing Equinox just in time for this video. With Soul Eater buffed, who do we see enter the Soul Lane again? Oh, thank God, it's Sun Wukong. This guy's never been good in solo, right? And what makes Wukong good the last time he used meta? Oh, the Jotun's Cliff, which in effect achieves the same thing as Soul Eater, so it feels the exact same. So you see, it's getting kind of to the point in Smite where gods just become good again for the exact same reasons. In part tying back to the whole bloated item stat stick situation, but I'll shut up about that for a sec. Since with Equinox, basic type-based warriors are good again, but for a different reason at least. They were good earlier because Phalanx and Berserker Shield were such an insane combo. Now they're good because of a damaging item instead at least, so it's different. Well, forgetting the fact that it now feels like the soul lane pool has been the same all year, since the same exact gods are at the same level of playability, since all the characters themselves barely receive changes. It doesn't really matter what character is buffed and not buffed, it's just, is there an OP item that makes them hit harder? There you go, they're meta. It's like they're not good because of some interesting interaction with an item or anything. They're just becoming good again because they stat boost themselves so much with overpowered items that they just hit really hard or can't die better than you. It's boring. In short, what I'm saying is, if Hi-Rez wanted to have such well-defined characters that only fit a certain niche, they should have released more unique and interesting items to spice those niches up. rather than just giving them big stat sticks to hit each other with. Equinox is a clear attempt at that, but I don't know if it's quite enough. And why did it have to be an attack speed warrior item, man? Why? I think Awilix is a good example of the opposite ideology. If ability-based warriors are strong, Awilix becomes strong. But she's not a god you want to pick every game. I mean, you can, but thanks to her unique ultimate and unique mount mechanic, it's clear as day she's better in some situations over others, i.e. playing with knockups on your team or playing against a lot of leaps. So she's a god you want to pick and ban around, if not outright ban so you can play what you want safely. But there's also entire matches where she won't be picked or banned at all. Now that sounds balanced to me. But Smite instead went with a sort of wishy-washy route, with characters who largely achieve the same things that almost always boil down to being stat sticks, resulting in very samey feeling metas. When ability-based warriors rise up again, they're not doing anything special or unique, they're just hitting you really hard. When basic attack-based warriors rise up, they're not doing anything special this time, they're just chasing you down again with no chance of you being able to kill them. The metas themselves are almost as boring as playing jungle in Smite, a role I fell out of love with years ago since... I don't even know where to start with this quote-unquote role. Honestly, jungle in Smite does not feel like the jungle role. It feels like a guy who kinda walks between lanes and kills buffs sometimes. This, I think, is mainly down to one thing. Other roles can and will kill your camps, and boy, there are a lot of camps. Almost as if there's too many to make up for the fact that anybody can kill a camp. In my view, this is just stupid. Nobody in a role outside of jungle should be able to kill jungle camps for the first 10 minutes or so. Period. End of story. Or that, at least not without taking a lot of damage. But what about all the farm on the map that the jungle can't get to because he's ganking over there and I'm over here? Well, this is only a problem, i.e. having so many jungle camps, because so much farm is put on the map with the intention of splitting it with laners, which just creates so many problems. Okay, so laners can't do camps. How does that happen? Pretty simple. Make jungle camps way tankier, make them give you almost no gold or XP, then make the jungle starter item do way more bonus damage to camps, and give you bonus gold and XP for killing them. Sort of evening it out with laners. Then, make it have 0 power as a stat so that laners don't use it. Boom. Or if you want it to have power for, balance reasons, just make it so the person who has the starter item stops receiving gold from lane minions after they get more than 100 gold from lane minions every 3 minutes or something. It's really not that difficult. Well, actually, yes, it is actually that hard, since all these problems arise from Smite's design philosophy of having each lane have their own buff they take, which in my view is also flawed. Not only does this make successful invades way too strong, since you get 2 entire camps difference in terms of gold and XP over your head as a laner and as a jungler, which is a major problem especially in the ADC role with that easy ass invade on the purple buff. But it also means that as a jungler, you're simply less important since the game now has gotten to a point where, well, if everything's going well, you're not really needed. Basically, if your team gets ahead, there's nothing for you to do until you and your team get tanky enough to dive towers, so you can literally only do your camps and go for invades. That's it. And it just becomes a waiting game until the meaningful objectives show up. And of course, what's the enemy team doing? They have to literally just sit under tower and try to get those buffs off of respawn, because they certainly can't fight you with that level lead they gained from the buffs. Since with the gold and XP of the buffs they invaded, plus certainly any neutral camps, such as prop buff, cooldown buff, and mid camps, the enemy lane opponent is simply not killable, and neutral farm is literally unattainable unless they make unrealistically greedy plays or simply don't ward for whatever reason. The whole laners with buffs thing is of course not the only reason for this annoying little cycle to happen in Smite, that being one team just sits under tower and the other team just ass blasts the entirety of the map. But it does come up way too often and tends to be far too easy to get going with. This is where, if you want to continue with the laners getting buffs, my idea of laners not being able to do their own buff and enemy laners not being able to invade on their own comes in a lot. This rather being dictated by each team's jungler. Say the enemy jungler is exceptionally aggressive and is right on time for the purple to invade. Feels bad, but with the simple system of laners simply not getting full XP and gold from camps, preferably in my view they get nothing, but whatever, suddenly your lane isn't shaken to bits just from one little invade. I mean seriously, they can get like a level and a half off of you if they get prop buff, you're purple, and they're purple. It's just too much gold and XP. You just have to sit back and just not do anything. Speaking of being shaken to bits, this would of course mean that you couldn't start the game with buffs. You can't expect your jungler to clear all of the buffs instantly, so they would probably have to set every buff to spawn at say maybe 3 minutes in, having only the speed buff spawn at the start of the match. This wouldn't slow the game the way you think though. Since you're the only one getting a buff, you could remove those stupid anti-invade debuffs that have been in the game for years, finally allowing for invades again. Meaning that, in theory, you'd say have your mid laner and jungler and solo laner crowding around the speed buff side of the map, to make sure the enemy team doesn't invade, and of course, without the stupid complex starts, the pre-game time could be reduced to maybe 30 or 45 seconds instead of the current 30 or 45 minutes like it is right now. Those are just some of my thoughts on how jungling could be made to feel like actually jungling, and not just whoring yourself to a laner anytime they want some extra farm, or whenever they want to invade the enemy team. Anything that goes on in the jungle should 9 out of 10 times be completely dictated by you as the jungler. The jungler should have full control of the jungle for the first 10 to 15 minutes, not just the first 3 to 5 minutes. And if you say this is all just a ploy to get laners to stop stealing my farm, yes, you're right. But I'd like to hear what you guys think about some of the changes I'd have made, maybe 5 years ago, to the jungle system of Smite. And what do you guys think about some of the other points I brought up in this video? Do you agree? Disagree? Oh, I'm sure you do. But regardless, I'll see you guys in Smite 2.